American President Donald Trump is currently in Washington trying to force Ukraine to effectively surrender Ukrainian territories in exchange for an illusory promise of security guarantees. The wording of Donald Trump, which he brought to Washington from Alaska after meeting with Putin, sounds roughly like this. First a peace deal, and only then talks about a ceasefire and truce along the front line, which seems completely illogical. So in this episode we will analyze what Trump is actually trying to sell to Ukraine and what all of this threatens. I liked how Time magazine covered it today. Trump publicly advises Zelensky to give up hope of returning Crimea and to abandon joining NATO. And he states that the war can be ended almost immediately if you go not for a truce but straight to a peace agreement. Coming from Trump, this supposedly sounds like instructions for peace in Ukraine. But behind this phrase, there's a whole architecture of pressure in which Kyiv has to give up its territories, abandon its foreign policy direction, and in return get a promise. And this is where the most dangerous and the most interesting part begins. My name is Alexei Pecci. Today is August 18th on the calendar. Next, we'll break down in detail everything that Donald Trump is trying to push on us now, after Putin whispered his vision of ending this war to him. Before we start, please subscribe to this channel, like, comment, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, let's break everything down honestly with no hidden agendas. Who is trying to impose something on Ukraine? What is being imposed? And why? Where is there genuine peace? And where is it just a pause before another war? I'll start with the facts. After the summit in Alaska, Trump began to increase pressure on Ukraine. And now Reuters quotes Trump's words in response to Zelensky, make a deal. Russia is a very big power and Ukraine is not. Actually, this is a classic negotiation tactic, to put it in diplomatic terms. That is, first you force your opponent to give up their strategic goals, and then you offer them so-called realism, which is the current situation on the ground. But the key point isn't the rhetoric, it's the framework that's being set right now. To give up on NATO, to give up on returning Crimea, Donbass and other occupied territories, and to agree to some kind of deal without a prior ceasefire. Such a peace clearly becomes, not the end of the war, but just a pause. Or, to put it figuratively, such a peace is not a lock on the door of war, but just a latch that can always be opened. What is Washington changing right now? It seems that in fact Al Jazeera is recording how Trump is summing up. Quote, Zelensky can end the war almost immediately if he agrees to the proposed configuration, but the nuance is in the almost immediately. This is about politics, not security. It's about, the image from the White House where the United States president announces, I achieved peace. And Trump will say after that, listen, in 6 months I ended 6 wars and here you go, this is the 7th. But real peace isn't just signatures, that's just mechanics. Who and how will restrain reckless Russia? Like tomorrow morning? For example, if they agree on something in the White House today and claim peace, what happens tomorrow morning? This is where Europeans are already raising concerns. Europe didn't just express support, because the leaders of the European Union and NATO formed a kind of human chain around the meeting in the Oval Office in Washington. And in the official statement on the website of the Council of the European Union, they state their position, without any reservations. Quote, Ukraine must have ironclad security guarantees. No restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia cannot have veto power over Ukraine's path to the European Union and NATO, and international borders must not be changed. Ukraine. If you translate from diplomatic language to everyday speech, it sounds roughly like this. No deal at the expense of Ukraine's territory or status. And, this is no longer just a background statement. It's like a march sounding in the Oval Office, reflecting the European position. What's the problem with Donald Trump's plan anyway? It's that he's proposing to completely turn the whole approach to peace upside down. After all, he's suggesting making some kind of peace deal without actual silence along the front line. And today Reuters directly describes this shift in position. Before Alaska, Trump warned he would be dissatisfied if a ceasefire wasn't reached after meeting with Putin. After the meeting, He agrees with Putin and says, why do we need a ceasefire or truce? First a big deal, then everything else. Again, translated into military language. The front line remains hot, the fighting continues, and negotiations are taking place under the roar of artillery. Why does Ukraine insist on a ceasefire before anything else? First, Russia needs to prove that it is truly committed to peace, and that's why it should agree to a ceasefire first. So the front line stops, stabilizes, and then we can discuss things. But Russia insists on continuing the war and remaining in the background. And what's dangerous is that essentially it's a verdict, in general, for any security guarantees, whether as part of NATO or outside of NATO. It doesn't matter, because a guarantee signed under fire is not protection. In fact, it's just another piece of paper. It's political smoke, it's political fog that doesn't stand for anything. Now let's move on to the Ukrainian position. In Kyiv, everyone understands this better than anyone. Again, Ukraine has a pretty tough red line. Ukraine will not withdraw its troops from Donbas because that would break their defense and open the way for new offensives. You know, this isn't stubbornness, it's the engineering of war, if you will. These are fortified areas, these are ammunition depots, these are artillery positions, these are supply hubs, and so on, which have been built up over 11 years. The war that Russia is waging against Ukraine, these are the positions that Russia has not been able to break through. Ik Zelensky Kiliavia Gaz and BY. Having reported the form, he will announce the cleaning of Avi. The Russians are essentially building a new bridgehead. What did Alyaska bring in this context? There is no ceasefire deal, as you can see, and this is the main effect of the entire meeting between Trump and Putin in Alyaska. If there is no silence, then any peace agreement is in fact just a set of future disputed points that either side can interpret to their own advantage. Minsk I and Minsk II have proven this. When war is raging and some agreements are signed against this backdrop, there simply can't be any wording that both sides agree on. So they're telling us we're almost close to a deal. Trump says the war can be ended almost immediately. But this almost in such situations is, basically a knife held to the victim's throat. And they're telling the victim to sign right now, because otherwise you'll have problems. That's the position Trump is offering. Now let's take a look at how this proposal is laid out around the world. Here, several Western media outlets, Reuters, Financial Times, citing their sources, describe the core, let's say, of the Russian position on the negotiations. The complete withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from Donbas in exchange for an alleged freeze of the rest of the front line, and some easing of claims from Moscow. This is the main point. Again, this position sounds like this. Give it up. Ukraine is being told, give up what you're holding, what you managed to defend, what you have held for 11 years and didn't let the Russians advance further. Give all of that up. And we, the Russians, say, will supposedly graciously stop and think about what to do next. And it's against this background that Trump's phrase, gotta make a deal, as he says, make a deal quickly, sounds. As if the Ukrainian defense and the Ukrainian constitution have nothing to do with it at all. But the Europeans respond quite clearly in documents where they write, we will continue to strengthen sanctions until there is a just and lasting peace. So in other words, no gifts to the Kremlin in exchange for concessions from Kyiv. Here, of course, the supporters of Donald Trump will say, listen, Trump promises guarantees, security guarantees. Maybe this is really a solution they do promise. And even his team confirms it. She says Putin basically agreed to such NATO-style security guarantees for Ukraine, but without joining NATO. The question is different. What does it all look like? I mean, it sounds kind of nice. But any guarantees without a mechanism for providing them, without ratification, without specified amounts of arms supplies if needed, are basically just Budapest Memorandum 2. Only, probably with a prettier cover. Europe sees this, Ukraine sees this. That's why both Europe and Ukraine insist there should be no restrictions on Ukrainian weapons or armed forces. That's the main guarantee, because everything else, unfortunately, no matter how you look at it, will just be a piece of paper. No one knows if this paper will be honored in the future. That's why the main guarantee, in any case, is not to give in to Putin's demands to reduce the armed forces of Ukraine to a certain size. Because a promise, let's be honest, is not missiles, it's not shells, and it's not even bullets. So the real mechanism for security guarantees is something physical. And one more psychological detail. The Guardian describes Zelensky's European entourage as bodyguards, not just figuratively, but politically as well. This isn't about solidarity, it's insurance against a quick peace that sacrifices someone else's land. Because a quick peace tomorrow turns into a quick war, and the political cost will fall on Brussels, London, Berlin, and Warsaw. And, as The Guardian writes, this is the whole point of the massive European landing in Washington. To be in the room when the time comes to say no. That is, when Trump insists on Putin's demands so that behind Zelensky there are those who supported him, they will say no to Trump. We are not going to surrender. Therefore, as a conclusion, I can simply mention what is circulating in the information space today. We can note the rhetoric. The White House says, give up NATO and Crimea, give up Donbas, and then sign the deal. Europe says that borders cannot be changed by force, and Kyiv says that we are not going to leave Donbass. And between these pillars, excuse me for speaking figuratively, there will be a tightrope that all participants in the negotiations will have to walk. This tightrope is actually thinner than it seems. On one side, let's be honest, are promises. On the other, defense and law. On one side are the armed forces of Ukraine, the constitution, and clear frontline positions. On the other, there's a promise of security guarantees. And if this peace without a truce, as Trump suggests, becomes a template, then the word peace, unfortunately, will just end up as a word in the title of the agreement. We will find ourselves in a situation where the resumption of Russian aggression will become much more realistic. I'll leave it there for now. Today, we'll review the Trump-Zelensky meeting results. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like this video. That's all for now. Take care and goodbye, everyone.